If terror had a sound, it wouldn't be a scream. It would be the sound of 1,000 porcelain plates sliding against one another in the dark. I sat frozen, my back pressed against the jagged, wet granite of the cave floor. My human hand was buried in the cold mud, clawing at the earth as if I could dig a hole deep enough to vanish into. My basalt arm, however, was doing the opposite. It was reaching upward, pulsing with a violent, rhythmic indigo light that mirrored the shadows dancing on the ceiling. Above us, the darkness was no longer empty. It was a honeycomb of white, featureless ovals. They didn't move. They didn't breathe. They simply existed as a collective weight, a pressurized mass of mathematical certainty that seemed to squeeze the very oxygen out of the cave. The air grew dry and tasted of burnt silicon and old, stagnant electricity. My teeth began to ache with a high-frequency vibration that made the marrow in my jaw feel like it was boiling. Tap. A single finger, 6 inches long and sharp as a needle, struck the granite. Tap. Tap. Then another. Then 10. Then 100. The cadence was deafening. It wasn't random noise. It was a calculation. They were pinging us, mapping the density of our bones, the flow of our blood, the flickering remnants of our memories. I could feel the data being stripped away, my childhood summers in the highlands being converted into strings of cold, indifferent numbers. The architecture is expanding, Lucas whispered. He was lying flat on his back, his basalt skin glowing with a sickly, bruised purple. His eyes were wide, and inside the black pits I saw the blue grid of the mother spinning at a frantic, impossible speed. He wasn't just a boy anymore. He was a hard drive reaching its capacity. "Gauchão!" I gasped, my voice sounding like a rusted hinge. "They're everywhere! You said the mountain was safe!" The old man didn't look up. He remained hunched over his wooden flute, his leathery face set in a grimace of absolute concentration. He reached into the dirt and grabbed a handful of mud, smearing it across his own forehead in a jagged, messy cross. "The mountain is safe, boy," he rasped, his voice barely audible over the mechanical tapping. "It's you who isn't. You brought the signal with you. You're a beacon, and your cousin there is the primary antenna. They aren't looking at the rock, they're looking at the mark." The tall man at the very center of the ceiling, the one who looked the most like the entity from the house, began to unfold. His limbs snapped into place with a series of wet, crystalline cracks. He descended from the roof, his feet never touching the ground, hovering inches above the mud. The hard reset was incomplete. The tall man's voice vibrated through the cave. It wasn't speech, it was a resonance that bypassed my ears and played directly on my nerves. The remainder persists. The noise must be archived. The highlands must be cleared for the new sequence. He reached out towards Lucas. His fingers began to hum, creating a localized vacuum that started to pull the very breath out of my cousin's lungs. "No!" I roared. I swung my basalt arm, fueled with a strength that felt like a rock slide. I didn't hit the entity. I hit the floor. I slammed my stone fist into the granite with enough force to shatter the rock. I wanted to create noise. I wanted to break the frequency.
The gaucho seized the moment. He brought the flute to his lips and blew a note so discordant, so fundamentally wrong, that it felt like a physical blow to my chest. It wasn't music. It was the sound of a forest dying. It was the sound of rust eating a machine. The tall men on the ceiling shrieked, a sound of static and grinding gears. Several of them lost their grip, falling to the floor like heavy porcelain dolls, their limbs shattering into gray dust upon impact. "The exit! Now!" the gaucho yelled. I grabbed Lucas by the waist. He was heavier than ever, his body now almost entirely stone. I hauled him towards the back of the cave, where a narrow, irregular crack led deeper into the mountain. It wasn't a geometric path. It was a jagged, messy hole made by water and time. Behind us, the tall man recovered. He didn't chase us. He simply raised his hand and tapped on the cave wall. Tap, tap, tap. The rock began to change. I watched in horror as the jagged, natural opening we were heading for began to smooth out. The curves of the stone were straightening. The irregular crack was turning into a perfect rectangular door. The mother was recoding the mountain. She was turning our escape route into a terminal. "She's closing the file," Lucas groaned, his red eyes flaring back to life. I looked at the door, then at the basalt spreading across my own chest. I could feel the cold math winning. I could feel the Leandro file being highlighted for deletion. I didn't stop. I ran at the closing door, my stone shoulder lowered like a ram. If the world was going to be an equation, I was going to be the variable that broke it.
My basalt shoulder struck the door, or what used to be a jagged crack in the granite, with the force of a falling moon. It wasn't like hitting a wall. It was like hitting a barrier made of high-voltage magnets. The moment my stone skin met the perfect rectangular frame of the portal, a shock wave of indigo static erupted, throwing my vision into a kaleidoscope of blue numbers and fractured grids. I heard the sound of my own internal architecture groaning, the basalt in my chest, hairline fracturing under the strain of clashing frequencies. The door didn't break. It yielded, but not to me. It yielded to the mother's logic. It was pulling us in, not letting us through. "The exit is a lie, boy!" the Gauchão screamed over the digital roar. I felt a spindly, freezing hand close around my left ankle, my human ankle. I didn't need to look back to know it was the tall man. His touch was a void, a point of absolute zero that instantly turned my skin to a frost-bitten gray. The basalt didn't crawl this time. It jumped, racing up my shin like a predatory vine. "Archive the noise," the tall man's voice vibrated through the floor. I was being dragged back into the center of the cave, back toward the honeycomb of masks on the ceiling. Lucas was already half submerged in the granite floor, the rock turning into a liquid gray pool of data slurry around him. He looked like he was drowning in a sea of mercury, his red eyes staring up at me with a terrifying, robotic peace. "It's beautiful, Leandro," Lucas whispered, his voice now a perfect, undistorted chime. "The sum, it finally reaches zero." "No!" I clawed at the geometric edge of the door, my stone fingers leaving deep, straight grooves in the quartz. I was losing. My human hand was shaking, the fingers losing their grip as the cold stone moved past my wrist.
The smell of the highlands, the wet earth, the rotting leaves, was being replaced by the scent of a sterile, vacuum-sealed tomb. I could feel my memories being compressed, the image of Grandma's face becoming a low-resolution thumbnail in a dusty corner of my mind. Then the Gauchão did something that wasn't in the equation. He didn't play his flute. He didn't smear mud. He reached into the tattered folds of his poncho and pulled out a small leather flask, a guampa filled with old fermented cachaça. He didn't drink it. He smashed it against the tall man's mask. The effect was cataclysmic. To the tall man, that liquid wasn't just alcohol. It was a century of human failure, sweat, and celebration. It was entropy in a bottle. The tall man let out a sound I will never forget. It wasn't a shriek. It was the sound of a supercomputer having a seizure. His white mask cracked, a jagged, irregular fissure opening across the porcelain. The blue light geysering out of his limbs turned a frantic, unstable violet. The ceiling of masks began to strobe. The geometry of the cave buckled. The perfect rectangular door we had been fighting against shattered into 1,000 irregular shards of light. "The mother is screaming!" I yelled, finally finding the strength to pull my leg free from the tall man's weakening grip. "She's recalculating!" the Gauchão barked, grabbing me by the collar of my jacket with a strength that shouldn't belong to a man his age. "Grab the boy! Grab him while the mother is blind!" I lunged into the pool of gray slurry. I reached for Lucas, my stone arm plunging into the liquid data. It felt like sticking my hand into a hive of electric bees. I grabbed his collar and hauled him upward. He didn't help me. He was dead weight, literal stone weight. But the slurry was thinning, the liquid turning back into mud and gravel as the Gauchão's chaos spread through the cave's local network. We scrambled through the ruin of the shattered door, tumbling out into a part of the mountain that felt wrong. They emerged onto a narrow ledge. Above them, the sky was still a blue grid, but below, the entire valley of the highlands was glowing. Thousands of square holes had opened in the earth, and columns of blue light were rising into the indigo sky. The highlands were gone. The Sierra da Taquara was being harvested. The house had only been the beginning. The mother was no longer hiding under the floorboards. She was turning the entire world into a vow. I looked at my basalt arm. The mud was gone. The blue veins were pulsing so bright they made my eyes bleed. I looked at Lucas, whose red eyes were fixed on the sky, reflecting the destruction of our home. "Leandro," his voice small and human again, breaking my heart. "The tall man, he's not behind us anymore." I turned around. The tall man wasn't behind us. He was standing on the ledge above us, his cracked mask weeping a thick black oil. But he wasn't reaching for us. He was pointing. He was pointing at the mountain peaks. And then I saw it, the ultimate geometry. A massive square shadow, miles wide, began to descend from the clouds, blotting out the blue grid. It was the size of a city, a perfect basalt cube descending to crush the highlands into a single, final sum. The calculation was over. The answer was silence.